Hello to everybody. Your kidney health is an important topic, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today to discuss it. Do you want to know what some natural ways are for improving the health of your kidneys? If you are looking for information about the top 10 natural drinks that promote kidney health, you have come to the correct place. We should start by discussing the importance of maintaining healthy kidneys. The kidneys play a crucial role in eliminating waste from the body. But what can you do to support these tireless organs and keep them in optimum condition? Your drink of choice is the most important factor. Most of us aren't drinking. The problem is the water itself. Fruit juices, sweet tea, and carbonated beverages are common choices, but they often include hidden sugars. These choices can make us more prone to have obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure, which are significant reasons individuals get kidney issues. So, how can we replace these sugary beverages with healthy ones that support our kidneys? That's what we're going to speak about today. And there's more in this video. We won't just tell you about these excellent drinks, but also explain why they are beneficial for you. You'll discover out how they benefit your kidneys, and most importantly, how you can easily add them to what you drink every day. Let's begin. Number 1. Ginger tea. Ginger tea is a spicy and savory drink that isn't simply delightful but also rich with health-boosting antioxidants. Studies involving persons who have renal illness reveal ginger's ability to enhance kidney function. This is due to ginger's complex blend of healthy chemicals and nutrients helpful for both mind and body. One of ginger's key components, gingerol, is recognized for its powerful health advantages. It's very good at lowering inflammation, which is significant since inflammation typically goes hand in hand with chronic conditions like kidney disease. So, ginger tea is a natural solution for addressing this condition. Ginger also helps prevent stomach ulcers and eases digestive disorders, including indigestion and constipation. For women, ginger tea can be particularly useful. Study suggests it can be as efficient as medication for pain and lowering menstruation discomfort, but without the adverse effects. Plus, ginger tea is noted for being effective at easing nausea. Here's an easy and effective technique to prepare ginger tea. Take approximately 1 inch of fresh ginger and slice it thinly. For each cup of tea you wish to create, put these slices in a saucepan with fresh water, using 1 cup of water per serving. Boil it. Then simmer it gently for 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how strong you prefer your tea. After boiling, filter the tea to remove the ginger bits. You may add a slice of lemon or orange for some acidity, and if you want, a little of honey or sweetener to soften the ginger's strong taste, which is an excellent option for individuals controlling their blood sugar. Just a heads up. Always talk to your doctor before adding any home remedy to your health treatment to be sure it's safe and suited for you. Number 2. Lemon juice. Firstly, lemon juice is recognized for its high quantities of citrate. Citrate, a chemical widely present in lemon juice, is vital in avoiding kidney stones, especially calcium oxalate stones, from developing. This is because citrate binds to calcium in the urine, making less calcium available to form stones. As a research in the Journal of Urology in 2007 found, even though lemon juice feels acidic, it actually makes the body more alkaline once it's digested. This impact of making the body more alkaline is highly important for keeping urine levels exactly correct. Research, like a study in the British Journal of Urology International in 2009, illustrates how lemon juice can boost urine levels and lessen the probability of some kidney stones, such uric acid stones. Lemon juice is also high in antioxidants, particularly because it has a lot of vitamin C. Antioxidants are vital for preventing oxidative stress that can harm kidney cells over time. A 2005 research in Free Radical Biology and Medicine revealed how vitamin C in lemon juice might help lower oxidative stress. Besides its antioxidant properties, lemon juice functions as a mild diuretic, which means it helps the body generate more urine. When drank in moderation, Drinking adequate fluids and the diuretic impact of lemon juice are beneficial for washing away waste and decreasing fluid accumulation. Chronic inflammation is another hazard to the kidneys. Lemon juice includes flavonoids that are anti-inflammatory, which could help protect kidney tissues from constant inflammation damage. Begin your day with a combination of 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, 2 tablespoons of pure lemon juice, and 500 milliliters of water on an empty stomach. This drink, including acetic acid from apple cider vinegar, citric acid from lemon juice, and vitamin C, can help clear your kidneys. Number 3. Green tea. Green tea is recognized for being full of polyphenols, which are potent antioxidants like chitin. These antioxidants are crucial in battling oxidative stress, an issue that can injure the kidneys since they always work to filter and get rid of waste. Green tea helps by fighting off dangerous free radicals, which can lower the load on kidneys, helping them stay healthy. Research has looked at how green tea intake influences kidney health. These research bring out some essential facts. First, green tea can help lower blood pressure owing to its high catechin levels, which is beneficial for keeping the kidneys healthy. High blood pressure is a well-known risk factor for kidney diseases, and the ability of green tea to lower blood pressure could help minimize this risk. Also, the anti-inflammatory benefits of green tea are quite essential. Long-term inflammation can affect the kidneys, and green tea's ability to ease inflammation can help lessen the danger of kidney impairment. Plus, the powerful antioxidants in green tea are highly essential for preserving the kidneys. These antioxidants work like shields for the kidney cells, defending off damage from oxidative stress. So, consuming green tea could assist keep kidney function strong and slow down any renal illnesses. Additionally, green tea's contribution to managing diabetes is noteworthy. Type 2 diabetes is a huge risk factor for kidney disease, and green tea's potential to enhance how the body uses insulin and maintains blood sugar levels could lessen the possibility of having diabetic nephropathy, also known as a kidney condition associated to diabetes. Lastly, the anti-fibrotic capabilities revealed in experiments on animals with green tea components are interesting. Renal fibrosis is a major concern in chronic renal illness, and the anti-fibrotic actions of green tea could give strategies to stop or slow down the development of fibrosis in the kidneys. Now, do you want to understand the best technique to prepare green tea to gain all the health benefits of green tea? You should pick high-quality loose-leaf green tea rather than tea bags. This guarantees you obtain the entire leaves and their nutrients. Start by pouring water that's hot, but not boiling over the tea leaves for about 10 seconds. Then throw away this water. This process helps get rid of certain early-release tea chemicals, taking away any strong tastes and making sure you receive a clear taste of green tea. Next, pour hot, again, not boiling, water over the tea leaves and let them steep for 1 or 2 minutes. This helps the tea leaves fully expand and unleash the entire flavor and health benefits of green tea, allowing you to experience all its deliciousness. However, if tea bags are all you have, they might still be helpful for your kidney health. Give this brewing process a try and note the difference. Number 4. Black coffee. Black coffee stands out as an abundant source of antioxidants, including chlorogenic acid, which is crucial in countering oxidative stress in the body. Studies, such as one published in the Journal of Nutrition in 2014, have regularly revealed black coffee's significant antioxidant qualities. Moreover, the caffeine in black coffee helps increase blood circulation, to guarantee ensuring the kidneys have a regular supply of oxygen and nutrients. This is necessary for them to operate effectively. The small diuretic impact of black coffee can also assist the body get rid of surplus salt and waste, which can help avoid problems such as holding on to excessive fluid. However, it's necessary to consume coffee in moderation to prevent dehydration. Additionally, drinking coffee in moderation can lessen the chance of producing kidney stones, as demonstrated by research like the 2017 study in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology. This advantage might come from more urine being generated and potentially fewer calcium oxalate crystals accumulating. Moreover, several studies, including one in the Journal of Nephrology in 2019, have revealed that coffee can help alleviate symptoms connected to renal disease, such as fatigue, but it's crucial to be careful. Drinking too much coffee can induce dehydration, elevate blood pressure, interrupt sleep, and upset the stomach. Watching how much caffeine you take and making sure to drink lots of water are vital for anybody concerned about their kidney health. Number 5. Cranberry juice. Cranberry juice is a terrific drink with numerous advantages for renal health. Its high quantities of antioxidants, notably proanthocyanidins, provided anti-inflammatory characteristics, making it a fantastic choice for treating chronic inflammation that can lead to kidney damage and challenges. A research in the Journal of Nutrition in 2013 validated similar effects, indicating that drinking cranberry juice lowered inflammatory markers in adults with chronic kidney disease. Additionally, cranberry juice is widely known for its potential to help prevent urinary tract infections, UTIs. The proanthocyanidins in cranberries aid by keeping germs from attaching to the lining of the urinary system, lowering the incidence of UTI. Further studies in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2016 supported up the usefulness of cranberry products, especially juice, in dramatically decreasing the recurrence of UTIs. This advantage is a huge gain for overall renal health. Moreover, cranberry juice delivers high antioxidant protection needed for resisting the oxidative stress that can damage kidney cells and contribute to renal disorders. A comprehensive analysis in Advances in Nutrition in 2019 emphasized cranberry polyphenol's capacity to reduce oxidative stress and promote kidney function. But there's more to cranberry juice's perks. For people at risk of damage to their kidneys owing to high blood pressure, cranberry juice provides support. Research in the Journal of Nutrition in 2015 revealed that cranberry juice could help reduce blood pressure quietly, which is wonderful news for the kidneys, particularly for patients with high blood pressure. Finally, cranberry juice could help inhibit the production of some kidney stones, such as the common calcium oxalate stones. The components in cranberry juice can prevent calcium oxalate from crystallizing in the urine, potentially lowering the probability of stone formation. Number 6. Seltzer water. Seltzer water, often known as carbonated or sparkling water, might be a suitable choice for a kidney-friendly diet. It has various scientific benefits that assist renal health. Firstly, seltzer water keeps you hydrated without any additional sweets or artificial additives, making it a wonderful alternative for keeping your kidneys operating effectively, especially if you're managing your sugar intake. Moreover, seltzer water generally has low salt levels, which is crucial for kidney health as too much sodium can cause high blood pressure and renal difficulties. Also, seltzer water could help avoid kidney stones. Some studies show that the bubbles in seltzer water might enhance urine flow, which helps wash out elements that lead to kidney stone development. This can be particularly useful for persons at risk of having kidney stones. Additionally, seltzer water is a pleasant and pleasurable approach to remain hydrated. Its fizziness and little acidity might help you to drink more fluids, which is vital for keeping your kidneys healthy. Lastly, seltzer water variety and flavor. You may add a dash of citrus fruits like lemon or lime to improve its taste without compromising its kidney-friendly properties. These citrus fruits not only offer flavor, but also supply a little quantity of vitamin C, which is helpful for general kidney health. Number 7. Beet juice. Beet juice is famous for its high nitrate levels, which are vital for kidney function. When you consume beet juice, these nitrates transform into nitric oxide in your body, a process that has been extensively studied. Nitric oxide acts to expand the blood vessels, which can help reduce blood pressure. An important research in the Hypertension Journal in 2008 demonstrated a substantial reduction in blood pressure by eating meals high in nitrates, equivalent to what beet juice provides. Moreover, beets are filled with antioxidants including betanin and vitamin C These antioxidants play a critical role in preventing oxidative stress and inflammation, both of which are directly connected to kidney function. Research, like the one published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry in 2001, has emphasized the remarkable antioxidant effect of beet extracts. Besides their antioxidant properties, beets could also help avoid kidney stones. A research in the Journal of Medicinal Food in 2013 demonstrated that beetroot extract decreased the production of calcium oxalate crystals, which are typically detected in kidney stones. However, it's vital to be careful with how much beet juice you consume, especially if you already have renal issues. Eating too much nitrates can be hazardous for renal function, as some studies have indicated. Number 8. Nettle leaf tea. Nettle leaf tea is highly effective when it comes to combating inflammation and has amazing cleansing effects. Known as the mother of all tonics, this plant is full of important minerals and aids the urinary system with its cleaning effects. The taste of nettle leaf tea is not only pleasant, but also refreshing. The tea is prepared from the stinging nettle plant, which in its natural state can be a bit harmful because of needle-like hairs that emit irritating compounds when touched, creating a burning feeling and rash. However, after the leaves are dried, they become safe to use and consume. Just be careful and use gloves if you're collecting the leaves yourself. To create nettle leaf tea, you simply need 1 spoonful of dried leaves per cup of boiling water. Let it steep for about 5 minutes. What makes nettle leaf tea so excellent for you? Even though handling fresh nettle leaves might be uncomfortable, the dried leaves used in tea are recognized for their anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving effects. Recent research, notably studies on arthritic pain, has revealed that nettle extract can be as effective as some pain medicines, allowing individuals to need less pain relief prescriptions. This is very crucial for patients with chronic illnesses like chronic kidney disease, CKD. In certain countries like Germany and France, nettle is even approved for treating urinary disorders, which underlines its potential to purify the body. Besides its anti-inflammatory effects, nettle also functions as a diuretic, helping kidneys clear excess toxins and fluids. Number 9. Horsetail tea. Horsetail tea is a powerful herbal remedy highly valued in herbal medicine for centuries. Known for its wide range of health benefits, dating back to ancient Rome and Greece, it has been used to address kidney issues and is still celebrated today for its effectiveness. Horsetail, also known as puzzlegrass, is especially helpful for people dealing with fluid retention. Its mild diuretic properties assist the kidneys in flushing out unwanted toxins, aiding in the body's healing process. What makes horsetail stand out is its high antioxidant content, which helps prevent the accumulation of free radicals in the kidneys, reducing oxidative damage. Moreover, horsetail has been recognized for its ability to lower blood sugar levels, making it beneficial for more than just kidney health. Its uses extend to improving skin and nail health, healing wounds, treating osteoporosis, and aiding in bone repair. The presence of silica in horsetail is believed to be responsible for some of these health benefits. Silica is important for storing calcium, which is essential for bone health and the strength of nails and hair. Horsetail is widely available and affordable, whether you're shopping online or in stores. When choosing horsetail, look for cones that are green, indicating they were harvested at the optimal time. These green parts of the plant are used to make a potent tea that supports kidney function. Here's how to make a nutritious cup of horsetail tea. Steep 1 teaspoon of dried horsetail in 2 ounces of boiling water for at least 15 minutes. After steeping, strain the tea and enjoy it plain, or with a touch of honey or lemon. It's best consumed in the morning or early afternoon to avoid interrupting sleep due to its diuretic effect. However, while horsetail tea is generally considered safe, it may interact with certain medications and isn't suitable for everyone. Always consult with a healthcare provider before adding it to your routine, particularly if you have existing health concerns. Horsetail has a rich history in traditional medicine, cherished in various cultures for its diverse healing properties. Whether you've tried horsetail tea before or have other favorite herbal teas, share your experiences and thoughts in the comments. Number 10. Dandelion tea. Dandelion tea, sometimes considered as a basic garden weed, is actually a hidden gem in the herbal tea world, delivering a wealth of health advantages, especially for kidney health. This underestimated herb's roots and leaves have been employed in numerous civilizations for its medicinal uses for ages. One of the primary advantages of dandelion tea is its natural diuretic qualities. It assists in the evacuation of excess fluid from the body, which is vital for preserving kidney function and controlling fluid retention in persons with renal disease. This little help in fluid removal helps ease the stress on the kidneys. Additionally, dandelion tea is rich in antioxidants, which fight against free radicals, reduce oxidative stress, and limit cellular damage, characteristics that can be particularly damaging to kidney function. These antioxidants also promote general health by boosting the immune system and lowering inflammation. Dandelion tea also shows promise in managing blood sugar levels, which is crucial for persons with diabetes, a typical precursor to kidney disease. Furthermore, it possesses liver cleansing qualities, boosting kidney function by lowering the body's toxic burden. The liver and kidneys operate in collaboration to sustain body health, making the liver-supportive characteristics of dandelion tea vital. Preparing dandelion tea is simple. Use 1 to 2 tablespoons of dried dandelion leaves or root per cup of boiling water, boiling for about 10 minutes. If using fresh leaves, aim for a small bunch. Strain the tea to remove the leaves or roots and consume simply or with a splash of honey or lemon. Whether you've tried dandelion tea previously or have other favorite herbal teas, share your experiences and views in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating tour through some of the greatest drinks for increasing kidney health. Please don't hesitate to post your story in the comment box below. Your contribution helps us all learn more and fosters the creation of a health-conscious community focused on renal well-being.